Since January 2015, our state and federal governments have needlessly killed over 100 people. As a law enforcement officer, I have a great responsibility, that of potentially taking someone's life to protect myself or others. This is a responsibility that I do not take lightly. Half of the states in our country, including Texas, as well as our federal government, still offer the death penalty for certain crimes. There was a time when capital punishment was necessary to provide for the public's safety. However, that time has passed. The death penalty is ineffective. It can sometimes be unjust, and with the alternatives available today, it is just unnecessary. You may think that taking a criminal's life is an effective way to stop them, but there will always be another criminal to take their place. Capital punishment is ineffective because sentences for crimes are not only intended to punish criminals, but more importantly to deter criminal activity, as well as rehabilitate violators. The death penalty fails here because it does not rehabilitate violators. Rehabilitation, by the very definition, implies that a person will be restored to a normal life. You cannot restore someone's life by ending it. More importantly, it's ineffective because it does not serve as a deterrent. The death penalty is carried out in a faraway place. The general public only sees a blip on the news if they hear anything at all about the person being executed. If the public is not aware that an execution has taken place, or the circumstances surrounding that execution, they will not be deterred from committing crime. In the 1972 United States Supreme Court case Furman v. Georgia, a case which overturned a Georgia death penalty decision, United States Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall is quoted as saying, "In the light of the massive amount of evidence before us, I see no alternative but to conclude that capital punishment cannot be justified on the basis of its deterrent effect." Not only is capital punishment ineffective, but it can also sometimes be unjustly ordered. Capital punishment is often unjustly imposed upon those who are indigent, upon minorities, those with a decreased mental or intellectual capacity, and persons with mental illness. One of the factors which led the Supreme Court to overturn the death penalty in Furman v. Georgia was the fact that there was no uniform policy to determine who was eligible to receive the death penalty and who was not. The Innocence Project is an organization which works to exonerate innocent people using DNA evidence. To date, the organization has overturned 365 wrongful convictions using DNA evidence. 20 of those convictions were persons sentenced to death. It is frightening to think how many others were not able to be saved despite a wrongful conviction. Now, I first learned the story of Sabrina Butler on a University of Michigan website. Her story is not an uncommon one. Here's what I learned. In the early morning hours of April 12, 1989, Sabrina walked her infant into an emergency room in Columbus, Mississippi. Moments earlier, Sabrina had walked in to check on Walter, her 9-month-old baby boy, and found that he had stopped breathing. She ran with him to seek help from neighbors. They rushed them to the hospital. Doctors and nurses worked on Sabrina's baby, but ran out of options and pronounced him dead. The following morning, Sabrina, the baby's mother, only 17 herself, was questioned by authorities. She was questioned by 12 police officers and interrogated by 3 detectives. No doubt, they were using a confession-seeking style of interrogation. This style of interrogation was very popular at the time, though it's still used in some places today. It focuses more on getting a confession rather than seeking the truth. Sabrina was not allowed to speak to her mother, her siblings, or even have an attorney present. Subsequently, she signed a false confession, saying that she had punched her baby. She was charged for the baby's murder, and on March 8, 1990, a trial began. The trial focused on the fact that the baby had internal injuries to the chest and abdomen, as well as on her confession. Sabrina's attorney did not allow her to take the stand in her own defense and presented no witnesses on her behalf. Sabrina was found guilty after only a few days. She was later sentenced to death by lethal injection. Sabrina's mother worked to help free her daughter and to prove her innocence. Along with two attorneys who took the case on pro bono, they worked diligently. On appeal, it was learned that at the original trial there had been misconduct on the part of the prosecutor. A motion was granted for a new trial, as well as a change of venue. At the new trial, her new defense attorneys placed Sabrina on the stand to testify on her own behalf. They also had two neighbors testify as witnesses, one of which had actually helped perform CPR on the baby. An expert witness was called up to testify. They testified that the baby's death was likely caused by a pre-existing medical condition, one which was known about prior to the baby's death. He further testified that the trauma caused to the infant's chest and abdomen was likely caused by attempts at resuscitation. On December 17, 1995, after 7 years on death row, Sabrina Butler was acquitted of all charges. Sabrina's case is not an uncommon one. From 1973 to date, there have been 165 persons released from death row after a wrongful conviction. Sabrina Butler is one of only 2 women who have ever been exonerated from death row. Sabrina now fights to help others on death row, as well as to assist those who have been recently exonerated. Now, understanding that capital punishment is ineffective, and that it can sometimes be unjustly dispensed, we must consider alternatives. In times past, incarceration was normally done until a trial could take place, and a sentence carried out. Society has evolved. We now have alternatives to assure the safety of the general public. Many who commit heinous crimes and are sentenced to death suffer from mental illness. Society now has mental health facilities with special forensic units to deal with these people. Some have a diminished mental capacity and do not fully understand what they did or that it was wrong. Again, there are special facilities to accommodate these individuals. Still, there are others who they're just criminals. They decide to do wrong instead of doing right. For those, society has large prisons. We have agreed that cutting off someone's hand or stoning them to death is no longer acceptable, and chosen to incarcerate them instead. As former New York State Governor Mario Cuomo said in a June 17, 1989 article of the New York Times, there is an effective alternative to burning the life out of human beings in the name of public safety. That alternative is life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. It is clear that capital punishment is an outdated form of punishment. For these reasons, and many other personal reasons, I oppose capital punishment. I see and understand that it is not an effective form of punishment. I am frightened by how easy it can be to wrongfully convict an innocent person to death. Knowing that there are alternatives available makes it difficult to understand why we still allow this to happen. It is time that we act as a society, as citizens, and as potential victims of this form of punishment. We need to reach out to our legislatures and urge them to make a change. We need to tell them about Sabrina Butler, Kennedy Brewer, or Vicente Benavides, or others who were wrongfully sentenced to die, all the while actually being innocent. I am sure none of these people that were sentenced to death ever considered that something so crazy would ever happen to them. I truly hope that you and your family never find yourself wrongfully convicted of a crime, and that if you do, the death penalty is not an option to be considered. If even one innocent life is taken unjustly, that's one life too many.